keep the microphone fairly close. Oh, we're ready. Oh, okay. I wasn't paying attention.
That was the 50-second thing.
You weren't.
That's fine. That's all right. That's fine with me. Good morning, everyone. I'm saying good morning because we will be broadcasting on Tuesday mornings at 8 o'clock. This is Kathy Palmer, Kathy not Carol, as you always know. I am here sitting at WCPC, Channel 15. It is in cooperation with Westfield State University, 89.5 FM. You can find any of our broadcasts online if you go to the City of Westfield website, and the City of Westfield website can direct you to any of our broadcasts that you can find on YouTube. So this morning, again, and I have a hard time saying that, guys, because it's afternoon.
It's afternoon, yeah.
So I have a hard time with that. But we have several things to talk about. Behind the glass over there, still talking to Bob Plass, because we can't ever get Bob Plass to stop talking, is Peter Coles. Peter Coles is our producer who does everything.
I'm talking to Bob because he's throwing something at me for Wednesday.
I know. I just said we never get Bob to stop. I love you, Bob.
Yeah.
I love you, Bob. I'm so glad that I was your girlfriend a million years ago, but that was on stage. And that's for another story, not today.
Oh,
I do need to ask, I know, interesting, isn't it? I do need to ask Peter if he's going to be available. Peter,
Yes.
My dear Peter, we have some changes coming up here at WCPC, Westfield Community Programming. Can you tell us what, and they're big. They're big. So can you tell us what those changes are?
Which changes you want to know? Why am I frozen on there?
Well, you can start with whatever. Start with the TV station. How's that one?
The TV station, so nothing major with the TV station except for we're in the process of building a mobile unit.
Ooh.
So that'll be built over the next about 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
So that'll be good. It'll make it a lot easier, and I don't have to carry that big black rack that's in the studio in my car anymore. It won't destroy my SUV.
Aha.
And all the equipment associated with it can all live in a nice little truck, and we roll up on somewhere, and we take it all out, and we set it up, and then we break it all down, and we put it back in the truck.
Now,
And it doesn't live all over the studio.
what kind of things do you have to travel to tape for?
Well, right now it's not a lot because of all the labor-intensive process in getting it set up. Mm-hmm. But we have brought that rack with the gear down to Florida for rocket launches.
Oh, that's true.
We've done it for Spring Sing. We've done it for the Pops concert. We've done it for graduation.
I was just going to say graduation.
I'd like to do more things like sports and things like that, but it's just crew, and it's generally just been me doing it, or me and Kenny doing it, and we're both kind of burnt out. So,
Right.
yeah, so having all the stuff in one place and moving it around would be wonderful. So that's the goal for that one. And then the other one is for the last couple of years, the students have gotten more and more active at Westfield State with the radio station. That's a great thing, but I don't want to see happen to us because we have a good thing going on the community radio side. I don't want to see happen to us what happened to the polka guys at WMUA years ago, where they were there one weekend and the students kind of came in one weekend and said, "This is it for you guys. You're done and you're off the air." And take it all away from them. And so their response was to go streaming because they had no other options. The last time the Federal Communications Commission had opened a filing period for new radio stations was 2013. I had heard of a filing period coming up in 2023, in late November of 2023, and I applied for a license and got one for the city. Mm-hmm. So we are transitioning out of the college into our own radio station.
Will there be any changes in programming, or is it just going to be business as usual?
For the talk shows and the morning drive, no change at all. Mm-hmm. Just change in call letters and change in frequency.
Yes,
But
I'm going to have to learn the new. Do you know how long it took me to learn the right ones, Peter?
We'll put pictures on. So then the graphic arts students are going to be designing a new logo for the station. And then the digital media students will be designing the kind of like the station itself. We're looking for automation software. We're going to get all that in place. And I want them to be the primary drivers of the radio station.
The students?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yep.
Nick, did you have any questions?
Well, I can tell you this. I worked for 88.1 WCHC as well as 91.5 WSDH years and years ago. So
I did not.
I can remember my old call letters for two different stations. One was in high school, one was in college. I had a question for Peter, I guess. So you got the license. I know these are few and far between. My old high school station is now a national public radio carrier, actually. We never had any kind of national programming when I was in school. But what we are changing call signs, frequency.
So this, because the city got their own license, WSKB will still be there.
Yeah.
But it's going to be run, completely by the Student Radio Club. And
Right.
they kind of carved out space for us just over a decade ago. But, they could take it back at any time. It's not our radio station. It belongs to the trustees and the students. So, so I'm like, have at it, you know what I mean? And so I just wanted to I think there's enough demand for a community radio station in and above itself, because we were the only community driver stuff. The rest of it was really on WSKB. It wasn't really, it was student-based, student interest-based, things like that. It wasn't really community-based. And I kind of wanted an overall community radio station, which almost doesn't exist nowadays in the marketplace. It can't in the commercial space because they just don't have the money to do that anymore. Not even the local stations aren't local anymore. And so a true community radio station is a rare thing. And the fact that the primary service here is Westfield and the surrounding towns is going to be wonderful. So
Nice.
yeah.
Excellent. Anything else on that, Peter, that you have to share with us about the changes?
No, just for most people, they'll just have to change the dial when they, when they're listening to us on the radio. It will be also a public safety aspect, because that will kind of be like the place you go for information when, states of emergency are declared or stuff like that. So parking bans, things like that are all going to be over the radio station. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that information, folks. Be looking for the changes, and we'll get back to you when that happens, and you will be the first ones to know. We are here at WCPC, Channel 15, WestfieldTV.org. Notice the voice to my right is not coming out of nowhere. The voice to my right is Dr. Nicholas Ieda from Westfield University. He is also the head of the History and Philosophy Department at Westfield State University, and he is joining us here as my co-host. And then to his right is Bob Madison. Bob is a well-known Westfield local author. He has written 2 books. He's written a book about the canal, and he has also written, his second book was about Lieutenant Richard Falley, and we will get to that shortly. In the meantime, before we do that, Nick, as a member of the Westfield Historical Commission, I always want to say hysterical, but I don't, although sometimes we are. What have we got coming up on June 14th, and why do we have this coming up?
Well, before June 14th, if you're interested in the Historical Commission, you should come to tonight's meeting.
Well, I said that the last time I taped, but the problem
I
is
know.
this is going to be on tomorrow, but you are correct.
Yeah.
We meet what nights?
So you go back in time. We meet generally on Monday nights at 6 p.m., and usually it's the 4th Monday of the month, but in months with holidays, it gets moved around. So here in May, we'll be meeting ahead of the Memorial Day weekend. In June, we are helping to host an event along with Parks and Rec, an event at the old burying ground on Mechanic Street. And this event will be a muster of Westfield militia reenactors, but regardless. And we have one historical commission member who has been learning some of the drill bits for this production. We will be at the burying ground from 12 p.m. till about 3 p.m. on Saturday, June 14th, with the militia walking through some of the drilling and showing the audience a little bit about their movement, their ability to move through the motions according to the arms manual through which they were trained. And that will take place starting around 1 p.m. And it will feature, in addition to the militia, a couple of local Westfield folks who have often graced us with their presence portraying historical figures from the Revolutionary period. So
And is there a fee?
Oh, no. No, there's no fee.
Excellent.
There's no fee. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe, so Dick Baldwin will be there.
We have Dick Baldwin, and I believe we have Mike Knapik.
Yeah. And Sam McMunn will be helping to lead us through this. He is he's a reenactor who's worked at Fort Ticonderoga, among other places. He's also a graduate of the very institution in which we are currently recording.
Correct.
And Sam will be walking through with folks who are going to be using black powder muskets. They are not firing any actual live projectiles, but there will be the occasional boom of the gunpowder.
Correct.
And so it'll be an interesting time to come. You can learn a little bit about our oldest graveyard here in town, or oldest public graveyard, I suppose, that somebody might have been buried in the backyard somewhere.
I was not buried there yet.
Yeah. No. So we'll have two kinds of opportunities really for folks. The gates will be open. You can come in and ask us some questions about the local residents of the space. I always hesitate when I say it that way, and we'll be have this wonderful opportunity really to see how the militia of the time period would have been walking through some of their training.
Correct. And I believe there will be members of the commission there to answer any of your questions about some of the Westfield local names that are buried there. I'm sure you'll see the names that you all know. You'll see Fowler, you'll see Noble, you'll see Gunn, you'll see many names that you will certainly recognize from the beginning of Westfield. The Westfield Old Burying Grounds is located on Mechanic Street, just behind, if you can think of Burger King, it's just behind where Burger King is. It is probably, although we're not exactly sure, one of the oldest burying grounds in the country that is still in its original place. There are many burying grounds older, especially when you get to your end of the state, that are older, and there are many that are older but were moved. So we have always been on Mechanic Street, although there have been changes to the grounds in general. So come on down and see us and visit us, and we'll answer some questions for you. And it should be a great day. I think what impresses me the most about Sam is his uniform.
Oh, that's a good point. So listeners, watchers, viewers, etc., will perhaps remember that the last time I was on the program, Sam was with us. And Sam explained, well, he outdid me for his outfit, which is true, but that's true on almost every
outdid
day.
me.
Bob has outdone me as well since I've come in my Nick's Nest T-shirt. But anyway, the Sam is not only a reenactor and interested in local history, the Revolutionary era, and so on, but also interested in how to kind of become a little more connected, I guess I would say, with the history of the time period. So he's made his own costumes for these events, and I guess I should say clothing, not costumes, because really
that's a good point.
That's the way they look at it, even down to, and this is the one that I think impressed both of us the most. It's one thing to shape your own hat and so on, but it's another to be able to make your own and craft your own shoes.
The shoes.
That has been probably the most impressive thing I think that I've heard about. And then I was not a great seamstress or tailor, although I'm the great grandson of a pretty good tailor, from what I understand. But it is not something that I ever really learned how to do with any aplomb. And yet he's not only made, waistcoat and shirts and trousers and jacket and so on, but the shoes, again, I think the only thing, if I'm not mistaken, the only thing he purchased were the stockings,
socks.
right?
Socks, yeah.
I think.
Yep,
so so he's working in the fabric of the time as well, and he does some reenactment work in a couple of different units. But this one is nice. He's pulled together a group of folks that he knows to help put together this program for us. Now, I will point out one important factor, and that is, while we'll be there, we hope, we do want people to pay attention. You can follow the Historical Commission on Instagram just to see, because if it's raining, literally that puts a damper on the event.
That was terrible.
Because
no.
you're not going to be able to actually,
I can't believe you said raining puts a damper on it.
you can't fire the weapons.
I know. He did say rain or shine, but we may need to reconsider that. But we'll keep you posted.
No,
on
he
that.
did.
Yeah.
He said he's up for it. The other folks are up for it. That's not really the concern. Certainly, in my reenacting days, as we talked about at our previous session, I definitely walked in all kinds of weather, and so on. But I was a fife person. I was like 10, 11 years old, so I was a fifer.
That would explain it.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to that, do we have anything else coming up for the Mass 250? Fall. We do in fall.
Yeah, so we're doing a couple of different pieces in relationship to Mass 250. We hope that people have enjoyed seeing some of the talks we've given since the fall of 2024. We'll be doing, so this event in June, then in the fall we'll have at least one talk on the United States and its continual efforts to invade Canada.
And we're still trying.
And why things didn't go well in most cases. So that's an interesting one because it's a very New England story. It'll give us a chance to talk a little bit about how New Englanders were feeling confident, despite the fact that they hadn't dislodged the British from Boston yet at the time. And then we're setting ourselves up in the fall for our January event in January 2026, where we'll have folks representing the General Knox train of artillery who will come through town. Now, I apologize because my brain is telling me that maybe there's one other thing in the fall, but perhaps not. I had the lecture in mind.
That's all I remember, honestly.
Okay.
That's all I honestly remember is the lecture that we have planned.
Right.
So,
but
there
that's
may be
right,
others.
because I know why I was confused. I was thinking about what we had discussed related to the burying grounds, but that's for next spring. So,
there may be an open house, too, at the Burying Grounds.
Right.
We usually do that in the fall, so that's a possibility. So those are the things that we have coming up for the Massachusetts 250. And not by coincidence, we do have another gentleman sitting to Nick's right, and that would be Bob Madison. And Bob is responsible for writing a book about Lieutenant Richard Falley. Now, you recognize Falley Drive. So you've heard the name, and it's surprising, Bob, how many people here in Westfield don't know the name. They've never heard of it other than Falley Drive, but they don't make that connection.
Which is too far away from...
No, you're right.
I mean, it doesn't make sense where it is.
Well...
Because it's over by Little River there.
No, Falley Drive is...
Off of Shaker Road.
No.
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking
Oh, that's
of.
right.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense.
doesn't make
It should
sense.
be closer to your house, and it isn't.
Well, you can call my driveway Falley Drive if you want to. I don't
Right.
care. So anyway, but Bob, tell us a little bit about you, your background, where you're from, what you did, and what you are interested in.
Basically, I graduated.
You want to put that a little bit closer?
Just move it in a little bit.
Graduated from Westfield High School,
I can hear you.
class of '61. My wife graduated from St. Mary's High School, the class of '61. So we lived in Westfield for quite a long time. After we got married, we lived in Avery Street in Westfield. She was a second grade teacher at Highland School, and I was still in college. Then we ended up moving to Shaker Road, not too far away from Falley Drive.
Okay.
So I have a certain history here, and I enjoyed it very much. Then I worked Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, the jet engine people, for 30 years. And after retirement from there, I ended up working for the state of Massachusetts, the Public Employee Retirement Administration Commission, and I traveled around Massachusetts auditing pension systems. Very interesting job. I could be out in Boston, I could be out in Pittsfield, I could be at Cape Cod, at Martha's Vineyard. When the second plane hit the Twin Towers, I was auditing Boston City Hall. I'll tell you that when I saw the picture on TV, I immediately left. I walked all the way to South Station and took a Peter Pan bus back to Western Massachusetts. So
Interesting.
in terms of Westfield, I think I have a lot of history here. Again,
I have a question, actually. You just because when you were on Shaker Road, then we were Kathy and I have been talking about this piece. You would have lived there probably when the schoolhouse, which had become a house,
I remember that
was
torn
still
down.
So
it's gone.
okay. I just Carly had confirmed that for me as well. But it's just it's in the survey for the city from 40 plus years ago. And then everybody was thinking that sometime between 2004 and 2008 or so, it got torn down.
I wish it was never torn down.
yeah.
Actually, but
Yeah, because it was converted into a house in 1938 or 9. And so the night we had some nice photographs of it from the survey.
Is that the one that down right at the base of Shaker Road?
It
Yes.
was the corner right
That's
of the
right.
Jose
two.
Torres's house, wasn't it?
No. It's
this-
it's the house
traffic
over
lights.
from Jose's house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the anyway, sorry, just occurred to me when you
That's
said the
whatever.
road. So yeah.
And of interest, my first book about the canal, my folks moved to Locust Street off of Shaker Road. I didn't realize that the canal went right by my parents' house.
Yeah, it did.
Right.
I attended a lecture at the Athenaeum, and Dr. Carl Walter was talking about it. And that's the first time I realized that there was a canal in Westfield next to my parents' house. And it's amazing, if you leave Westfield area, people don't know that there was a canal from New Haven to Northampton going through Westfield, just like Lieutenant Richard Valley. People don't have a clue what's going on this side of the Connecticut River in many cases.
Well, Boston doesn't, but that's
That's
okay.
for
This
sure.
is
You're
true.
talking to somebody
Well-
who lived on the other end of the state.
It's true, but it's funny because well, you know this, but my family had spent a lot of time in Western Massachusetts, and I remembered as a kid thinking, why don't more people come here? Like, it's interesting, it's nice, people are nice.
It is.
And my parents were both from Dorchester, so for them to get outside of west of Worcester, let alone
Exactly,
let
yeah.
alone west of the Connecticut River, as you just pointed out, it was was slightly unusual, but a lot of it came from my father's obsession with the symphony and music in general. So he essentially followed the musicians. If they're out there in the West, okay, well, I'm going to go there in the West.
So, Bob, what got you interested in Lieutenant Richard Valley?
I guess I was born in Philadelphia during World War II. And after the war, my dad was in the Army. After war, looking for work, he ended up working for Strathmore Paper Company. So we lived in Warnoco for a few years, and I went to elementary school in Russell. Thinking back when I was fourth grade, 9 years old, 5 of us decided to ride our bikes up over the mountain, Mount Shadrach, up to Montgomery. And at that time, most of the roads were not paved, all dirt roads. So when we got up into Montgomery, everybody wanted to take this paved road to go to Westfield. And I saw this dirt road. Gee, I'm going down the dirt road by myself. So I took off myself down the dirt road, which happened to be Decorah Road. Part of it is still on the map, although I don't think it can travel on anymore.
No, you can't.
But in reality, it went right by Richard Valley's house in Westfield, Montgomery. So at the end, the dirt road turned to a path and ended up being a meadow, if you will. And off in the distance, I saw the railroad tracks. And this is before the Massachusetts Turnpike was built. Went down over the Westfield River, across the Westfield River, up to Route 20, bicycled all the way home. So years later, I started thinking about that. I mean, first of all, what a stupid thing for a 9-year-old to go up by himself. But other than that,
On the
you know,
other hand,
Richard Valley, people don't know about him. And having lived in Avery Street and Shaker Road, and then I worked at Pratt Whitney, pretty much succeeded there. So we lived in Long Meadow for 20 years. And we were on our way back to Westfield when the kids got out of college. And we just happened to find this building lot in Feeding Hills. And, we ended up building a house there. So we never got back to Westfield. But I look upon Westfield, I think, with a different lens than if you lived here your whole life. Having left Westfield, lived in Longmeadow, worked in the greater Hartford area and in Boston, coming back, Westfield has a lot of history. A lot of it's forgotten. And really, once you get to the other side of the Connecticut River, if it wasn't for the Six Flags, I guess, at MGM, nobody even come this way.
I think that's true.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit more about Richard Falley, where he lived in his home, and you mentioned his home on Toccoa. Toccoa Road, by the way, did come through from Montgomery, but the turnpike cut it off, and it came all the way down, and it came down through to Pachastic, so you can't get through there anymore unless you want to go under the turnpike, which I'm not doing.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
I'm not
do that,
doing.
No.
It's very scary. Peter, I sent you a video. Can you play that video?
Good
There you
afternoon,
go.
ladies and gentlemen. My name
Here's
is
Sam,
McMahon,
by the way.
and today we are here at the site of Faley's Armory in Westfield, Massachusetts. This site was the home of a factory which built muskets from 1775 up until the late 1700s. These muskets were built by Richard Faley Jr., who was a lieutenant of the Westfield Militia Company. Today we are here to take a look at the site. And we're also going to be firing off a round in memory of Richard Faley on the occasion of the 250th of the American Revolution. So, here we go. Good.
There you go. And that was the area that you probably went through when you were just a little kid. So tell us who Lieutenant Richard Falley is, Bob.
Well, Richard Falley, his father was born in island of Guernsey off the coast of France, but it was owned by the British Columbia. And in my book, because of the writings I heard of Richard Falley's seniors, I'm trying to get my dates squared away here.
Oh, the dates aren't important. It's all right.
Don't worry about the
Okay.
dates.
Just
But in
talk
my
about
book,
that.
Richard Falley Sr. was kidnapped by some French sailors and was sent to the New World, to New England. But this past January, I was contacted by Jack Silver from the British Broadcasting, who's BBC, who's a journalist. And somehow he found out about my book, and he says, wait a minute, he wasn't kidnapped. In 1640, they had a law in these islands off of France that if the parents could not support their children, or if they're foster children, you could gather up all these kids, you have to be 7 years old or older, and they ship them to New England. As long as they're being fed and taken care of, it was an okay thing to do. So,
Ouch.
So kidnapped or put into work.
Yes.
We can look at that in a couple of different ways. This is actually
Either one works well.
It's an interesting point to reference, though, Bob, because this is one of the arguments that Richard Hakluyt the Younger makes with Elizabeth I when she was still queen. He's saying, look, we'll solve all these problems of all these fostered children, or these kids whose parents have died, or these kids whose parents can't support them, because we'll just send them over here to North America. And he's writing that document in probably 1587 or so. And, so it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that somebody would contact you and say, oh, well, actually,
yeah, different point of view.
Right. Right.
But we did that even here with the orphan trains later
Well,
on.
sure. Yeah.
We sent them off, and they weren't always children that were orphans. They sometimes removed them from families that couldn't support them.
We have to
and
save
said,
them from the Catholics.
Let
You understand.
those horrible Catholics, those dirty Irish.
I mean,
So, and they sent them off across the country. So, Bob, that wasn't unusual, was it?
No.
So
very much
he got sent over here, and then what happened?
Well, he ended up in Cushing, Maine. But some of my research says he was in Boston, in different other locations, Nova Scotia. But he eventually ended up moving to Concord on his way to Ware, and ended up with his father in Westfield. Now, in the area of the foothills of Mount Decoa, before the turnpike went through, there was actually a real settlement there. And some of my reading said there was even a post office.
There was a post office, there was a general store, there was a mill. There are about 20 foundations up on Montgomery.
Yeah.
It was a regular little town until Westfield purchased 5 acres to use for their reservoir.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I think the Decoa Reservoir was torn down in 2018.
I believe so.
And then there's another reservoir above it, which I think
The
is
upper reservoir.
reservoir.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very busy place at one time. And if you think about it, the Valley family, when they're moving from Maine to Massachusetts, that I'm sure they didn't have any money, if you will, and to settle somewhere like the foothills of Mount Decoa, Moose Meadow Brook, that had to be a great thing where you can settle in and nobody would bother you. Now, I want to make one point. Westfield, the Reverend Lockwood writes that in the early 1700s, Westfield was a vast territory, all the way from Congamon Lakes through Westfield, downtown West, across Westfield River, and then all the way to Hamden Ponds, and a little bit of Russell and Montgomery, the way we see it now. So it was a vast area, and there were only 107 households in the early 1700s. I have my notes here, 1,032 people. So it was open country and an excellent place for people without resources to settle.
Correct. I also ran across something, Nick, someone from Montgomery gave me their history book, and it mentioned that during the Revolution, which would be Valley's time, it was all clear cut. Decoa was just about clear cut.
Yeah, that's not uncommon in New England. One of the things that people tend to get fixated on is the idea that we're preserving in certain areas so-called old-growth forest. We're not. We are essentially working on third, in some cases fourth-generation forests, and in some instances even more. And part of that's about the aging of trees. So, for example, the house I used to own just up the street it was built in 1924, and you can tell a couple of things about it based on the height of the pines that are out front. And those pines only will go 75 to 100 years or so, and then they kind of get a little bit wavery. So in the time that I lived there, which was 11 years, I lost 3, basically 2. They got too old, right? And so it's not just about people coming in and doing the clear cutting. And to Bob's point, like if you're looking for a space that is a potential farming area, or just a space where I don't have much money, but maybe I can become part of this community, part of what you need to do that is to cut down the trees. And it's not just about, clearing it for livestock, but you have to use that wood. We don't tend to think about it that much, but the idea of the construction is one thing. Your neighbor, the Bancrofts, were unusual in that they went and built that house out of brick. But most people are not doing that. And the other thing that's happening is you've got to cook, and you've got to wash clothes, and you've got to get warm, and you've got to, and in his case, ultimately, you have to use fire for your main business, ultimately.
It's interesting you brought up Bancroft, because I understand that during the Revolutionary War, he was a British spy.
That's the story.
It's just a story. I don't know if it's true or
Yeah.
not. It was in the Hartford Courant, my research said.
Yeah, there's a report from at least one Hartford newspaper that indicates that he was referred to as an enemy against their country.
was.
That was the name that they, and it's an interesting turn of phrase there, right? That they're referring to themselves, Connecticut, as a country or a place. And he,
WCPC 89.5.
sorry, there seems to be a story that connects him, at least in an accusatory way, now whether this is true or not, to aiding and abetting a few prisoners. The attack into Canada was not successful for the Americans, but they did manage to get a couple of prisoners, and some of those folks were removed back down into New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut, and one of these prisoners shows up in a variety of different letters, as well as this newspaper article that you just referred to, as walking away from his parole. It was his last name was McKay, if I'm not mistaken, and it was Bancroft who was accused of perhaps aiding with that walk.
Interesting, yeah.
And he went back up to Canada, supposedly. But
That's my neighbor, folks. Supposedly, Bancroft lived in my farmhouse.
in the farmhouse even.
Yes, the local lore is that he lived in the farmhouse that I have, and his wife didn't want to come to Westfield. It was just the wilds. It was, she didn't want to live here, and so he built the brick mansion down the road. And if you looked inside at the construction of the farmhouse, I do believe it. So, Bob, tell us, what is Richard Falley known for? Why are we talking about this man, other than he lived in Westfield? Oh, but first, Peter, we need to take a short break, don't we?
Peter's like,
No,
maybe.
you guys can keep going if you want. You don't
All
have to
right.
take a break.
Okay, we'll just keep going.
Yeah.
Never mind. So what was he known for? Why are we talking about this guy?
Well, in terms of my book, we discussed earlier that a lot of people didn't learn about Richard Falley. But once I learned his military career and all the battles he was in, but what he was really known for is manufacturing flintlock muskets in Moose Meadow Brook, which is now Montgomery, which was part of Westfield at the time in 1776. Now, just a little bit of history. I believe my research says that Richard Falley Sr.'s house was exactly where the Mass Turnpike is.
Correct.
Now, Falley's father died in 1756, and at the age of 16, young men between the age of 16 and 45 were required to join the militia. So when his father died in 1756, the country was involved in the French and Indian War. So he went off to New York, where he fought in the French and Indian War. And I try to cover this in my book briefly, covering off a lot of his terms of military campaigns. But his key thing is he was manufacturing flintlock muskets in secret in Moose Meadow Brook, foothills of the Mount Tekoa.
That's my question for Nick. I know that these types of operations were going on all through the colonies, weren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just in Westfield.
No, it wasn't. Sorry, I didn't know if you were.
No, that's it. That's my question.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's other spaces where it happens, certainly. The idea is it's an interesting kind of problem because manufacturing weapons was really an artisan's approach. There are several different kinds of skills you have to have. Maybe you're mostly concerned, like Falley was, with the metal side of it and the mechanisms.
Blacksmith,
yeah,
He's a blacksmith.
Exactly. But you have to work with others to get the right kind of wood for the stock, and you have a pattern that you follow typically that you might make adjustments on. But no, they weren't manufacturing them in in large scale at this point, and so a lot of different communities had these small productions. And one of the things that the government of Massachusetts, which was a royally appointed governor and then eventually a military commander, didn't really want was a lot of people doing this because the firearms were necessary for other reasons. As Bob mentioned, all these young men up to their 40s had to serve in the militia anyway. So you had to learn how to utilize the weapons. And in theory, you wanted to have them. And so you wouldn't necessarily be given them. And so somebody had to be doing the manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And in Westfield, one of the things we talked about in April was how the Westfield community had perhaps 45 to 50 men who were called out in the aftermath of the news coming to Westfield about Lexington and Concord. So on April the 20th and into the 21st, they're gathering together. But when they had taken account of weapons in February of that same year, February of 1775, they came up with 3 to 5 bayonets and about 40, maybe 38 or so firearms, and that didn't really help. But a manufacturer like this could kind of change things for the community, for sure.
Very good, yeah.
He was interesting too, because just as another aside, I know we want to talk more about his manufacturing of the weapons, but because as a young man, as you already mentioned, Bob, he serves in that first conflict against the French, and he is not in a particularly enviable spot as a young person because he ends up as a prisoner.
He was captured at the fall of Fort William Henry and Fort
William
Edward, right?
Fort Edward, yes.
Oh, hey.
William Henry.
But he was caught by the Indians. Most of the British soldiers, of course, they wore red uniforms. They were slaughtered, literally. But if you were in the militia, you were worth money. So he ended up in Canada, and he was ransomed for 16 gallons of rum. He ended back into Westfield. I have my notes that Reverend John Ballantyne writes in his diary in November 19th, 1957 that he visited Richard Valley when he returned from Boston to Westfield. But
the negotiations on the ransoms used all kinds of things. As you mentioned, it was rum in this case.
Yeah.
And you didn't get to go right home. I mean, it might make more sense to you and I, like, well, just come down the Connecticut River. But you had to go back through the provincial headquarters. And so that's why he ended up in Boston, but then eventually here.
So when he got back here, he was here for a while, and we can get up to the Revolutionary War. What was his purpose in the Revolutionary War with the armaments, Bob?
Well, the Battle of Bunker Hill, he distinguished himself to such a great extent that the Committee of, the Committee of Safety promoted him to an ensign. And they also made him the Massachusetts armorer for the state, obviously for the state of Massachusetts. So during the Battle of Bunker Hill, he distinguished himself. If you visualize this, thousands of farmers, merchants, laborers ended up migrating to Boston to kick the British out. And they came there with their rusted muskets, missing pieces, and he was the person who knew how to manufacture muskets. Obviously, he knew how to repair them. Mm-hmm. And this was his value. I don't believe he was ever in combat, but he had a company of men, I put that in quotes, who were repairing muskets in the Battle of Bunker Hill.
We had some difficulty, didn't we, trying to decide who was actually at Bunker Hill.
Well,
we couldn't.
Yeah, there's some disagreement about which militia members from Westfield actually were present, but it makes a lot of sense that somebody with the armorer's background would be present. There was a lot of ebb and flow, as you just pointed out. The city is under siege, and so people are moving in and out of that space. These militia were not necessarily, they don't leave their towns in April and go to Cambridge or Roxbury on the south side and just sit there for the next 6 months. I mean, they're going, and then maybe I'll go back home. Well, I got to plant some things. So, I go back home, then I
yeah.
come back. But one of the things that they really were trying to do was make sure that the Army couldn't, get out of the city. And as you pointed out, when you've got all these folks who are essentially volunteer soldiers, they have all kinds of manner of broken pieces, and they need somebody to not only manufacture replacement parts, but also work on the molds for the bullets and like all that. So it's a definite need in the community there. But what you're alluding to is also the question of like, well, which militia got where and when, and we have all kinds of disagreement here in Westfield about that.
This is the only thing that I did find.
Right.
That he
That's
was.
Timothy Danielson. Yeah.
Yep, in Danielson's, Massachusetts, he was there, and he was there from May to December. That was, and it's an interesting. It was an interesting resource I found, Bob. It's Officers of the Continental Army in 1914 by Francis Heitman, and it lists, and you do find him listed there. You will find Fally there. Fally,
Exactly,
however you want to say it. We've had so many arguments. So, Bob, he was at Bunker Hill. We're pretty sure that he was at Bunker Hill.
Oh, yeah.
We're pretty sure that he did have his job fixing and repairing anything. And then what else did he do? So what happened after Bunker Hill? More or less. Not specifically, but...
Well, my notes, in March 17th, 1776, the British left Boston. Okay. What I find is very interesting, the following year, in 1777, he was back out in New York. And when you probably could help me out with the
Saratoga? was
Saratoga.
Oh, yeah.
You want
Saratoga?
to talk about the German general and the American general in their route, if you will, from New York to Boston. I found that very interesting. I don't know if you want to elaborate.
There's always been some misinformation, but Fally, now help me out here, Nick. The Westfield contingent or the Massachusetts contingent, didn't they get to Saratoga after it was over?
Well, it's a long campaign, so
And there were two campaigns, right?
well, yeah, because if you go back into August,
Yeah.
you've got the campaigns in what is now modern-day Vermont, plus New York. As Bob's pointing out, there's a mixed force here. There's British, there's German soldiers, or ethnic Germans, and then, of course, there's a variety of Americans. And they're similar to what happened in Boston, really. There's people moving in and out. It's very fluid. They're moving up to Bennington. They're spending time at Bennington. In August, they're able to kind of stem, an advance, sort of a probing advance from British and Germans eastward out of New York. And so for someone like Fally, it's a need to be almost like what you were just saying about Bunker Hill. This is the need, right? I mean, he's got the skill. He's going to bring people in. We've got a number of Western Massachusetts groups that are in and out of Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, all throughout that late summer, early fall. The question is which units were where and when. We know that some units out of Worcester County under Bigelow were at the combat itself. So, but again, that runs weeks. It's not it's not like a day. We tend to think of these things as a day. Because of Lexington and Concord, which was a day, right? But even Bunker Hill was a series of
many days,
until those final assaults up the hill. And in the case of Saratoga, it's a series of almost missteps on the part of the British before they get to this final moment, and. So who's there, who isn't? The records seem to indicate again that whether Danielson's group, which was the Hampshire County group, because again we weren't Hampden County yet, we were part of Hampshire County,
Right, yeah.
and So that had some Westfield folks in it, but it also had people from, from Palmer and from Springfield and from West Springfield and so on. So there are some questions there in terms of who is engaged with which part of the combat. Another interesting point, sorry, just as an aside, because of Bennington, you had mentioned his work at Bunker Hill. One of the really successful folks is John Starks. And Stark is somebody who is admired by the British for what he does at Bunker Hill from a strategic standpoint. And he's the one who stems off this probe, at Bennington in the late summer of 1777. So I wonder, I don't know the answer to this question, but I always wonder, okay, well, did Valley get did he have two connections with Starks? Is it on the hill, and I don't know. I
don't know.
It's just,
we don't know. We
but
can't find it.
It's just an interesting question to wonder about.
The one thing all the heroes of Bunker Hill, in the Boston perspective, these were wealthy people and they had good educations and whatnot. With Valley, there really wasn't a big paper trail.
Right.
He was just a regular person, a farmer, if you will, a blacksmith, who worked for, he didn't have lawyers, family and friends, or people in high power.
No, he didn't. Nick, didn't they buy their way to a lot of their commissions?
Well,
Wasn't it money?
a lot of the wealthier folks in the provinces, would have bought
supports what he
commissions,
said.
which is exactly what you're pointing out, Bob. And even when we look at someone like George Washington, why is he serving in the Virginia militia? It's not just about being a young man and it's sort of expected, and he was the younger son, and blah blah blah. He's also buying into literally an English tradition. You purchase your commission in one way or another. Does that give you experience? Yes. In his case, for Washington, it gave him 4 years of experience at a leadership level, which was different from some other folks. But the militia, of which, as you pointed out, Valley had been part since he was in his teens.
Yeah, exactly.
Is by the time the revolution occurs, he's been at it one way or another, either training or through his manufacturing, 20 plus years, basically, which is a lot more service time than many of these other folks that you were just mentioning, God.
So I want to just step back in time a little bit.
Sure.
In my book, I talk about Knox's artillery train that came through Westfield. And my notes said in January 13, 1776, Knox came through Westfield one day, one way or the other. But I did pick up in my research that, let me kind of explain. Valley's house was on 16 Court Street. There is a Methodist church there now,
Right.
Yep.
but it was torn down. Right across from Valley's house was Clapp's Tavern,
Yep.
which is now the Westfield Library Athenaeum. So in terms of my research, I'm thinking, gee, Valley's house is across the street. 69 cannons came down Court Street. Nobody knows what officers were there, but I found a quote where, so General Knox wrote to General Washington, where he said, "What a pity it is that our soldiers are not as numerous as our officers." So I'm saying, if there are three,
He must
what do we
have been
have?
there.
We have
Right.
Valley, we have Danielson, we have Parks. We only have a handful of officers. So I'm just assuming Valley was there when General Knox or Colonel Knox went through Westfield at the time. So I point that out, but I point out too that it's really speculation. Nobody knows who the officers were, but there weren't that many officers in Westfield.
At that time, no, you're correct.
Well, it makes sense that if he was in town, that he would be present, right? That's
Yeah.
such a momentous kind of movement.
And
Sure.
Sure.
Just visualize
Sure.
60 cannon
Right.
being hauled through by oxen and horses, and all the militia and all the people. It had to be quite a spectacular parade.
Right.
It's possible, and I think and it might be in your book also that you pointed out that Knox supposedly stayed at the Clap Tavern, which, by the way, is now a doctor's office.
It was moved down the street a little bit.
Moved down the street. Yes, it was.
Yeah,
So-
we do have a good tradition of moving buildings.
They did.
town.
They did all the
For
time.
sure.
They moved the house where the Athenaeum is. They moved the Clap Tavern. They moved the Fowler House. They moved everything all the time. Just put it on the rollers and off you go.
Right.
Sort of like your caravan. After the war, what did he do, Bob? He had a profession.
Oh, well, he was a blacksmith
He was
and
a
a gunsmith. But I do want to point out that I had to bring in my book, Shays' Rebellion. Now, there's no... General Shepherd was the general that fought the Daniel Shays' rebellion, if you will. He was the person that the armory, or was the arsenal in Springfield, and he fired off 2 cannons into this mob that was trying to break into the arsenal. So I had to bring in that. But again, just like in the
Knox Trail?
Knox Trail,
Yes.
yeah, there's no record of the only officer that is General Shepherd. But in terms of the captains or lieutenants or privates, there's no record,
Don't
to
know.
my knowledge, as to who's there.
He may very well have been
Well, Shays was an officer.
correct.
I mean, just to
Yeah,
just
I
to
think it was-
point it out.
I think he was a captain or
But
something.
yeah. No, it is interesting because among the Shays supporters, their story of the day is very different, right? So like it's a very interesting kind of situation where from Shepherd's perspective, they're doing this. From Shays' perspective, Shepherd's group is doing this other thing. And the two there are those 2 cannon shots, and it's and the response from the Shayites is pretty immediate, and it's murder
Yes,
is what
it
they
was.
say into the crowd. Now they dissipate immediately because, of course,
Oh, yeah.
most of these men were veterans of the war, and they knew that we're not going to be able to do anything against cannon, and that is, just another interesting kind of detail of the moment. But again, ties these Westfield people together. So
Yeah,
it's an interesting
exactly.
question
Yeah.
you're asking.
And then the other thing is, if you remember, in our time, in 2008, there was a recession caused by mortgages being sold off to other people,
Right.
and they're foreclosing on all this property. Well, with Shays' Rebellion, the real problem is, according to my research is, the state of Massachusetts required them to pay taxes with gold and silver.
Right.
But they were paid with this paper,
Paper.
Continentals. And basically, the state of Massachusetts would accept that for payment.
Right. The
So
other
these farmers got all upset. I mean, this is, I'm not a historian in terms of what's going on in Shays' Rebellion, but
But it is interesting, again, that there's that connection between the town, right? So West Springfield, Westfield,
Oh, yeah.
Springfield, all connected.
And
as you're
Valley
pointing
was
out.
probably there for all of them. Who knows? Well, we don't know. But you know what, folks? We're running out of time. So if you want to know more about Richard Valley,
So the book.
tell us. There's the book. Tell us where you can get the book, Bob.
well, it's on Amazon or Silver Street Media, a publisher in Agawam. But you just go to the library.
And they have
Both
it
my
too.
books are at the library.
So if you want to know any more, and Bob does do occasional speeches, if anyone is interested with your organization and you would like to have Bob do a speech there, by all means, get in touch with him. Do you have any coming up lately, Bob? Anything else?
I got one at Agawam Public Library,
What date?
June 19th.
Okay, and if you forget it, just Google Agawam Library and you will be able to find the site on there.
That's a Thursday this year.
Is that?
Sorry, just pointing it out. So
How do
we,
you even know
How'd
that?
you know that?
Are you one of those that can pick the date and can we tell you a date and you'll tell us?
no, I know why, because our event is June 14th, which is a
Okay.
Saturday.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're correct.
So
So
that's
by all
why.
means, join us on June 14th
Yeah.
in the Mechanics
Then come see Bob at the Agawam Public
and
Library.
go see Bob.
on, June
And
the
for
14th,
more
19th, sorry.
information, please go to the City of Westfield, to the Westfield Historical Commission, and you can get more information there. And on Instagram?
Yeah, we have the
and
Historical
Facebook?
Commission site on Instagram, and we duplicate those posts over to Facebook. Yeah,
And what is our site on Facebook? I never.
Historical Commission of Westfield.
Okay, I never remember that. I
Yeah.
always have to look it up.
Yep.
So that's it for today. Peter, thank you very much. Bob, we thank you for coming to
And
see
thank
us.
you
Thank
for
you, Bob.
inviting me.
It was
Very
a
good.
pleasure to talk to you again. Peter, we're out.